everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and you're listening to the podcast. I really appreciate you. I say it all the time and I will continue to say it. I appreciate you for listening in and now watching the podcast. And because you've been listening, you've helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. And it would be a big help if you go over, rate, review, subscribe, and we can keep the podcast going. All right. Now, today I'm talking with Danielle Cobo. Now, let me tell you about Danielle. She is the author of the outstanding book, Unstoppable Grit, and she'll tell you more about that later. Danielle is a former Fortune 500 sales manager and is renowned for empowering individuals with grit, resilience, and courage to thrive both professionally and personally. She's an acclaimed speaker and thought leader, and her life's work epitomizes grit and resilience. And I can't wait to hear more about it. And so let us all welcome Danielle Cobo. Welcome.
Thank you. I am excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here. All right, I just read a little teeny bit introduction and bio, but why don't you just tell us in your own words more first about you and
Mhm.
then about the work you do?
I am a military spouse. So my husband is a Black Hawk pilot in the US Army, and I'm a mother to 6-year-old twin boys. And I say they're thrill-seeking twin boys that have more energy than a squirrel on a triple espresso. It is full of energy at my house. And I spent 15 years in medical sales, where most recently was a senior region manager for a Fortune 500 organization. And I was blessed to have an amazing career in corporate before venturing out on my own and doing keynote speaking and career coaching.
Good for you. Wow. Just imagining those boys with all that energy. And I mean, some people might just be listening in. Well, you look great for keeping up with all that energy.
They keep me young, that's for sure.
All right. So now I mentioned your book. Tell us about the work you do and then about the book.
Yeah, so I started writing the book around 2021. And what I found was it was right after the the world had shut down with the pandemic, and world as we knew it changed and shifted for many of us. And what I found is a lot of people coined 2020 as the year of the great resignation. And it was because a lot of people, for the first time, had put their life on pause and reflected back and said, is this really what I want out of life? There's so much more. And I was one of those individuals. I had spent many years working in corporate, climbing the corporate ladder. I was a highly successful sales manager. One year I spent 250 nights on the road. This was before kids. But even still in 2019, my twins were 2 years old. My husband was deployed for a year, and I was still traveling 60% of the year because I had this idea of what success looked like. And it meant climbing the corporate ladder and earning a certain income and tying success to awards and accolades and titles. And what I realized through this journey of going through this experience it was a series of events that took place in a 6-month period. But what I realized coming out of it was there is so much more to life than a title, a salary, sales awards. It's really about what do you feel energized from? Where do you feel fulfilled? And how do you find purpose in your life? And that's what sparked the journey of writing the book.
Yeah, I love that. Of course, that you paid attention to yourself and what was working for you and not working for you. And that's part of my story. And it's part of the reason why I do this, because years ago, similar to your experience, I was working in a bank though, and I thought, this is just not fulfilling for me. That it went against who I was and my personality and my whole way of being. And I just couldn't stay in that position anymore. And it set me on a quest for meaning and purpose. And it took me 20 years to find it. And so now I'm trying to save people the time. So I have people like you who've done it to come on and talk to others who are thinking about it and looking at that. All right, so now we just heard about how you got there. Now tell us about the book. What's the main idea, the main premise in the book?
The main premise of the book is how to break through the 7 roadblocks standing between you and achieving your goals. Ultimately, it's how to build a career and life that you love, knowing that you can have both. It's not a one or another, but really defining what success means to you.
I love that. I love that. Would you say you have, now that you're doing this work, do you have a career that you love?
I do. I have a very fulfilling career. A lot of what I get to do is I get to help individuals pursue their career goals. So really, but more of what it is, it's either they're pursuing a career pivot in their journey, or they're in sales and they want to earn a particular goal that they have, or maybe they want to start a business. But ultimately, I get to do a lot when it comes to building confidence within individuals so that they feel unstoppable.
Now, it sounds like you had confidence when it was your time to move forward or to make that change. Tell us more about that. I'm sure there may have been some challenges and some decision-making process happening because some people listening might be having that same thing. So tell us what was going on with you during that time to
Yeah,
help
so
point where you are now. Yeah.
it was a 6 month period where my life professionally and personally completely changed. In 2019, my husband, like I mentioned, he had served a year deployment. So when he left, our twins were 1.5 years old. They were drinking out of bottles, they were sleeping in cribs, they were learning to say their first words. And all of a sudden, he comes back from Iraq and they're in toddler beds and they're formulating complete sentences and they have opinions. And he went from this war zone in Iraq where missiles were hitting his base to coming home to toddler temper tantrums. And it was a big shift for us because I had been used to making all the parenting decisions on my own. I had become very independent. He was used to leading teams in a high stakes environment. And so for us to come together and navigate together as a united family took some adjustment. And right as we started to find our rhythm, March 8th, I tragically lost my mom. My mom had passed, and she had passed from suicide. So it was unexpected. It was tragic. I couldn't believe that somebody was in so much pain that she felt that the only option was to take her life. And as I was trying to cope and heal from losing my mom and trying to process what had just happened, a week later, March 13th, this was the third event that took place in a 6 month period. The world had shut down. The global pandemic had happened. So I wasn't even able to go home and take care of the things with my mom. My mom lived in California. I was living in Florida. And so I was having to navigate everything over the phone with trying to have people help me, all going through this pandemic. And then a couple months later, the organization that I was with had been acquired by a larger organization. And I had somebody on my team that created a very, very toxic work environment. And so after 7 years with the organization, I ended up leaving. And it was at that moment where everything from my life, professionally and personally, just completely shifted and changed. And I went into retrospect and looking at my life and reflecting back and saying, what do I want? Not so much what did I think I wanted? I wanted, growing up, I wanted to be a manager by 30. I wanted to own my own house. I wanted to be married. And I had accomplished all of those things. But was I really fulfilled? And it wasn't until I took a step back and reflected back on my life and saying, you know what? It's been a great journey and I've enjoyed the ride up until this point, but I believe that I'm ready for something different. And not to say that some of these career goals may not be for the long term. Maybe I do want to go back to corporate and maybe pursue higher roles within the organization, have greater influence, but not for this phase of life that I'm in right now. I want to be more present with my kids, and that's more important to me right now. So it's not a never. It's just a not right now for this phase of life that I'm in right now. And how can I create something professionally for myself where I still get to be fulfilled in helping people and being an influence and being a change maker, but also be present for my family?
Yeah. Wow, that was a lot to go through all in a short amount of time. I'm sorry to hear about your mother and the passing, and at that time when you couldn't be there and all that you had to do. And so now I'm connecting the dots between grit and resilience because if you're still here now talking to us and have made the changes in your life that you made, you're a walking testimony of what you're talking about in your book.
Mhm.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
amazing. And I'm imagining that's inspirational to other people. And sometimes it does come with the life changes do come with a loss. Years ago I lost my mother and it was a springboard into the next phase of my own career after I got over the initial grief and everything and looked at my life and asked the question. And so for people who are listening, it may not be a loss like that of a parent or of a person. It could be of a position or a job or something else in life that shifts and change that gets your attention and it's kind of life moving you forward to the next thing in your life. All right. So it sounds like this really has ushered you into this new life. And so it sounds like you have a strong sense of purpose now. Is that right? Do
I
you?
do.
Yes.
Yes, I do have a strong sense of purpose.
I love that you have that and that you found it. Um, what would you say, what would you say in your book reflects who you are? What part of your book reflects who you are?
So it's interesting because some of the feedback that I've heard the most from readers is they appreciate the vulnerability in the book, which is interesting to me because when I was working in corporate, I went through a 360 performance review, which is they have 23 individuals, people that reported to me, people that uh, I worked with, that we are on the same team, and then people that I directly reported to. And they asked all these 23 people questions about me and my leadership experience. So it's called a 360 performance review. I did not see the questions. I just basically got the responses from everybody. And it's interesting that in that performance review, people said, as some of the feedback, there was positive feedback, but of course, I always looked at like, what do I need to change? And the feedback was inauthentic. And for majority of my life, I lived my life very guarded. I didn't let a lot of people in. And the reason being is because that was my defense mechanism so that I wouldn't get hurt. My mom and dad divorced when I was 2.5 years old. My mom actually took me from my father. So I didn't meet my father until I was 15 years old. And I grew up thinking that my dad had abandoned us. But in reality, my mom had kidnapped me from my dad. And so I had a lot of hurt and anger and resentment. And so as part of that, as part of my defense mechanism is I just wouldn't let people in. And so I think that it's really interesting that the number one feedback people are saying in this book is they appreciate the vulnerability because it's a lot of what maybe they're thinking. They can either relate to some of the stories or they may not relate to some of the stories, but they can find themselves in the pages. And I'm saying the things that people are saying internally to themselves, but maybe people aren't speaking out loud about. So they feel like they're not alone.
Yeah. Is there something that comes to mind that you remember? If not, it's okay. That you remember from an example of people saying, ah, I resonate with that, or it sounds like something I would say. You remember something?
Yeah, I talk about the time where I had hit extreme burnout, where I remember sitting on the living room floor. My husband's deployed, my kids are asleep. I had just been working a long week. And here I am trying to make my pantry look Pinterest worthy. And I'm getting so caught up in the what life should look like versus and creating the burnout for me versus just taking a pause and not in falling into the comparison trap. So I talk about really what are some things that influence how we view success, how to rewrite our own definition of success, how to take the remote control of our mind so that whatever influences what we believe, what our beliefs are, understanding where they come from and how we can shape our own version.
And you mentioned burnout. What's a symptom or like if somebody's thinking,
Mhm.
if I'm burnt out or if I'm experiencing that, what's one way they can tell they might be experiencing a similar type of burnout?
Well, in the book, I talk about the physical symptoms of burnout and the emotional symptoms of burnout. So, the physical symptoms, I talk about doing the weekly body scan. So, our body communicates to us when we are burnt out, it's just that whether we pay attention to it or not. So, I say stand in front of a mirror and when you stand in front of your mirror, go from the top of your head down to the bottom of your feet. Is your hair dull? Is it breaking? Is it thinning? Is it falling out? These are all signs of overexhaustion, burnout. And your skin, is your skin breaking out? Do you have any acne? Does it look dull? Maybe you have a lack of hydration. Even just 2% of dehydration could be causing mental fatigue. Then going to your neck. Your neck, is it stiff? Are you getting increased migraines or headaches? Those are a sign of tension, stress, and burnout. Then your décolleté, hives. I used to break out in hives every third quarter when I was in sales because I was so stressed out with hitting my quota. But that's a sign of stress and overwhelm and exhaustion. Your stomach, how are you digesting your food? So these are all like the physical symptoms that your body's communicating to you that you're stressed, that you're overwhelmed, that you're overworked. And I say pay really close attention to them, because if you are experiencing any of those, like that is a time to pause and to really identify what is causing the burnout and what's causing the exhaustion. Then there's the emotional signs of burnout. Are you experiencing extreme mood swings? That could be a sign. Are you finding that yourself is a little bit more irritable easily? You know, a lot of times it's like when I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I could be quick to be irritated with my kids, which is never the people you want to be irritated with, but I notice it. And when I start to get irritated, I go, ooh, is it them or is it me? I think a lot of times it's a reflection of me, and what do I need? What behavior do I need to change so that I'm not coming across that way? Complaining could be one of them. Are you finding yourself complaining to others or complaining about yourself or about your life? That is a sign of emotional burnout. Self-criticism, escapism, where you don't want to be around anybody. Those are also signs. In the book, I go through the 7 signs of emotional burnout, and I go through the steps on how to overcome them.
That's very helpful because I'm imagining, people saying, oh yeah, I recognize those in me, and thinking of them saying in me. And for my own experience, I had a physical reaction. Remember, I just mentioned earlier about working in a bank, and I had gotten to a point where, it was just too much. The headaches that you mentioned, I had the headaches. And then in the middle of the workday, and this happened more than once, by 10 o'clock in the morning or so, before lunchtime, blood would just gush out of my nose. Random. I'm just standing there, not doing anything in particular or different, and blood would just gush out. So after a couple of times of doing that, it got my attention, and I'm like, this is the stress of my body reacting.
Mhm.
So those tips that you give now and that people could read more fully in your book are very helpful for people to look for those signs, because for our sake in this conversation and the podcast, as you know, is leadership purpose. Those are the things that keep you from really pursuing your purpose. Those are signs that you may not be moving in the direction of your purpose. Speaking of purpose, do you think it's important for people to have a sense of purpose in their work, even if they're not having all those extreme, let's say, symptoms that you talked about, any of those or the ones that I had? Do you think it's still important for people to have purpose in their work?
I believe a lack of purpose is one of the highest indicators of burnout. And the reason being is there's been times where I have worked long hours. However, I've had a sense of purpose that has fueled my drive and motivation. And there's been other times where I've worked less hours, but had no purpose and have felt more overwhelmed and exhausted. So I believe that without a sense of purpose, it's easier to have experience burnout.
Yeah, yes, I have that same thinking. All right. So the podcast is for what I call high achieving women. Now, not everybody, but there's probably different definitions of high achieving women. So I'll tell you my definition. High achieving woman to me is a woman who is responsible, goal oriented, ambitious in a positive way, doing all the things, and she's good at a couple of things. And because she's good at a couple of things, people come to her in her professional life and ask her questions about whatever the thing is. Could be related to the job or not, but they come to her for questions. In her personal life, family, friends, extended family, or whatever community, they come and they ask her questions for her advice. So she's the one that's always giving support. And now she's at this place in her life where she is at the top of her career ladder or have some level of success and feeling unfulfilled, looking for, craving, and yearning more meaning and purpose in her life, saying there must be more than this. All right, so now for that woman, with that woman in mind, what's something from either your personal experience or your professional life and experience? What words of advice can you give to the woman I just described?
So I would say if you're feeling like you're not having fulfilled, I would say look at how you're spending your time. What activities are you spending? Like, what activities are taking up your time where you're feeling fulfilled versus the ones that are not? And how could you take it? How could you work towards a shift towards the ones that are more fulfilling? I noticed for me that when I was, um, before the pandemic, I worked a lot. I still work a lot, but I wasn't being intentional about building relationships where I lived. I'm originally from California. I live in Tampa, Florida now. And there's many times where I was so focused on work that I would just work. And then that was, on the weekend, spend time with my family, but I wasn't intentional about building a community. And so now I look at the life that I have now. I'm very connected in with my church. I have a group of friends that get together on a regular basis. So I feel more fulfilled because I'm more intentional about how I spend my time, who I spend my time with, and activities that fill up my cup.
Ah, and do you think that's what caused the sense of purpose in your life right now because you have those relationships and community?
Yes, I believe that community is so important to our own welfare and well-being.
Yeah, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. All right. Uh, Danielle, you've been so generous with your time. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that comes to mind and might have one more thing or one thought, and one more thought? If not, it's okay. But is there anything that I didn't get a chance to ask you that you want to share before I tell people how they can get in touch with you?
The biggest thing that I would share is for those that are listening, really identify what belief systems, what was either shared by you from your parents, by society, by movies. And I go through this in the book on how to really uncover what they are, but what beliefs were shared with you on how you currently define success. And in the book, I share what are some steps that you can take to rewrite your own version of success so that you are living a life of purpose and fulfillment.
Okay, I love that. I love that. And I'm imagining people are saying, all right, well, where can I be in touch? So where can they be in touch with you?
Yes, the book is Unstoppable Grit, Break Through the 7 Roadblocks Standing Between You and Achieving Your Goals. And it's available on Amazon in paperback, hardcover, and now Audible.
Well, and where can they reach you on social media or your website, or how can they reach you?
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn. So Danielle Cobo, that's Cobo. And I'm also daniellecobo.com.
Danielle, thank you so much. It's a delight to have you here. You're doing important work. I'm glad you're doing it for all the people who are having those experiences of burnout. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, and if you want to hear more from me, I'd love to hear from you. I'm on social media, but mostly on LinkedIn, like Danielle. I'm on LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, Robin L. Owens, PhD. But I'd really love for you to go over to the podcast website and check out our resource there. They'll help you have your first steps toward meaning and purpose in your work. And that website is leadershippurposepodcast.com, leadershippurposepodcast.com. Love to see you there either way. All right, and until next time, this is Dr. Robin.